At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're reading from. I'd love to know how far my voice travels. I've always believed that family celebrations should be wrapped in warmth, joy, and laughter. My granddaughter Lila's wedding was meant to be one of those days, the kind that stirs up memories like golden dust, something you treasure in quiet moments. Instead, it became the day I discovered how my family truly saw me. That morning, I took extra care getting ready. At 65, I wouldn't call myself vain, but I still wanted to look nice. I chose a soft, pale blue dress. Thomas, my late husband, had always said it brought out the color in my eyes. I styled my silver hair just the way he liked it, swept away from my face, and dabbed on a trace of the perfume he'd given me on our final anniversary, the year before cancer took him. "You look beautiful, Evelyn," I told the mirror, and for a brief moment, I imagined it was Thomas saying it to me. I could almost hear the steady calm of his voice, feel the invisible warmth of his hand resting at the small of my back like it used to. The ceremony was held at Gracewood Chapel, a lovely old building with stained glass windows that caught the light like jewels. Lila looked radiant walking down the aisle, her arm tucked into her father Stephen's, her eyes brimming with joy. The expression on her it was the same one I wore the day I married Thomas. My heart swelled. For that one moment, everything in the world felt as it should. Stephen beamed with pride. Even Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, looked genuinely moved, her eyes glistening as Lila passed by. I allowed myself to relax, to believe the day might really unfold the way I'd hoped. But that hope began to unravel. Not long after we arrived at the reception, the Briar Hill Hotel's ballroom was grand and shimmering with gold accents, soft music curling through the air. I approached the check-in table, where a young woman sat behind a neat display of name tags and table assignments. "Here you are, Mrs. Langley," she chirped, retrieving a card from a tidy row. I took it without much thought, expecting it to read, "Evelyn Langley, grandmother of the bride," but instead, printed in elegant cursive, was, "The old lady who will pay for everything. My gal." My hand froze midair. Surely, this was a mistake. "Is something wrong?" the young woman asked, noting the sudden tightness in my expression. I pasted on a brittle smile. "I think there's been a mix-up with my name tag." She leaned in, eyebrows knitting together as she read it, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Let me check if there's another one." "No," I said quickly. I didn't want to make a scene. "Not here, not at Lila's wedding. I'll speak with my family about it." I pinned the card to my dress with trembling fingers and stepped away from the table. My cheeks were hot, the shame creeping down my neck like spilled wine. I scanned the room. Had Lila proved this? Surely not. But Stephen, Vanessa, who thought this was appropriate? Worse, who thought it was funny? During the cocktail hour, I tried to smile. I made polite conversation with distant relatives and friends of the couple, pretending not to notice their eyes occasionally flick to the label on my chest. Maybe they were too kind to comment. Or maybe they didn't see it at all. But then I overheard the two guests chatting quietly behind a potted palm. One snorted with laughter. "Did you see the grandmother's name tag?" Vanessa said it was hilarious, the other replied. "Apparently she's their personal ATM." I turned away before they could see my face. My hands were trembling now, not just with anger, but something deeper, a dull ache, somewhere near the heart. Just then Stephen spotted me from across the room. "Mom," he called out, gesturing with one hand. "Come meet the Andersons. Dad used to golf with Bill." I hesitated, but walked toward the group. I recognized Bill Anderson vaguely, maybe from one of Thomas's old business dinners. His wife Martha smiled politely. "Mom, this is Bill and Martha Anderson," Stephen said, then chuckled. "Our walking bank account." I felt Martha's smile flicker as her gaze fell to my name tag. Bill looked startled, his posture stiffening. "Evelyn Langley," I said, my voice steady, offering my hand. "Thomas's widow." "Of course," Bill replied kindly. "Thomas spoke of you often. He was very proud of you." The conversation moved on, but I barely heard a word. When the Andersons finally moved on, I took Stephen aside, my hand gently touching his sleeve. "What's the meaning of this?" I whispered, pointing to the name tag. He laughed. "Oh, Mom, don't take it so seriously. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the one with the deep pockets since Dad left you everything. It's humiliating," I said quietly. "Oh, please," he rolled his eyes. "Lighten up. It's a party." Before I could answer, Vanessa swept in like she was on cue. Her dress was shimmering, her smile too polished. "There you are, Evelyn," she said. "Has Stephen been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who made this gorgeous day possible." She winked. They both laughed. I excused myself and made a quiet retreat to the restroom. Inside the restroom, I gripped the edge of the marble sink, willing my hands to stop trembling. I dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, careful not to smudge the mascara I'd applied so delicately. That morning, the powder room was as grand as the rest of the Briar Hill Hotel. Mirrored walls, gold fixtures, a vase of white peonies perfuming the air. I stared at my reflection. My dress, once chosen with such care, now felt like a costume, a hollow disguise. The door creaked open behind me. I expected a guest, or perhaps Vanessa checking in to smooth over any damage. But instead, a man stepped halfway in, then quickly backed out, apologizing. "Oh, Mrs. Langley, Evelyn," he called from outside. "It's Charles Morton. I wonder if I might have a word." Charles, Thomas's attorney. The man who had managed his affairs with both grace and discretion after the funeral. I composed myself as best I could and stepped out into the hallway. "I hope this isn't an intrusion," Charles said gently. He gestured vaguely toward my name tag, then cleared his throat. I noticed some of the comments, and well, something told me this might be a good moment. I nodded, still too emotionally raw to speak. "There's something you need to see," he continued, lowering his voice. "Something Thomas left for you. He asked that I only deliver it, if circumstances called for it." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a thick envelope. "A codicil to Thomas's will," he said softly. He added it shortly before he passed. I took the envelope with trembling fingers and opened it. The legal language was dense, but the meaning leapt out like a flame. Any descendant who publicly humiliates Evelyn Langley is to be disinherited from their portion of Thomas's estate. I blinked, rereading the line. And then again, my mouth went dry. The fortune Thomas left behind. It was larger than I had ever known. He had always been frugal, reserved. I had never asked questions, assuming what we had was enough. And it had been. Until now. I looked up at Charles, stunned. "Why didn't he tell me?" "He didn't want you to feel burdened," Charles said gently. "He hoped it would never be necessary. He wanted them to treat you with love and respect, not fear." I stared back into the grand ballroom, where my family drank and laughed, oblivious to what their cruelty had just cost them. "What do you want to do?" Charles asked. I folded the document carefully and handed it back. "Nothing. Not yet. I need to see just how far they'll go." As I re-entered the ballroom, the weight of the name tag felt different. Still heavy, yes, but now it pressed against me not with shame, but with something sharper. Resolve. The morning after the wedding, I sat in my kitchen, still in my robe, staring at the name tag I'd peeled off my dress the night before. I had set it on the table like a trophy of mockery, the old lady who will pay for everything. I traced the lettering with one fingertip, my heart clenched. I imagined what Thomas would have said if he'd seen it. His temper had always been slow, but unshakable when someone hurt those he loved. "They've changed," I whispered to the empty room, as if he could hear me. Or maybe we just didn't want to see who they really were. I moved into the living room and stood beneath the family portrait hanging above the fireplace. It had been taken 5 years ago, on our 40th anniversary. Thomas sat in the center, strong despite the illness that had just begun to nibble away at his strength. I stood beside him, one hand resting gently on his shoulder. On either side were Stephen and Vanessa, and in front of us, Lila and her brother Noah, then just teenager. We looked like a family. I stared at the photo. When had it changed? When had respect faded into expectation, affection, entitlement? The questions clung to me like fog as I moved through the motions of the morning. I brewed a pot of tea, set the kettle to warm, and then, on a sudden impulse, I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a long-forgotten box filled with old receipts, check stubs, and donation letters. I sat cross-legged on the floor like a schoolgirl, sifting through the detritus of the past 3 years. The numbers told their own story. Since Thomas had passed, I had given Stephen and Vanessa nearly $250,000. It hadn't begun that way, of course. The first time had seemed innocent, comforting, even. I remembered it clearly. 6 months after the funeral, they had invited me for dinner, a rare occurrence back then. They were charming. Warm. Too warm, Mom, Stephen had said as he poured me another glass of wine. Vanessa and I were thinking about remodeling the kitchen. Just something simple, modern appliances, a few upgrades. That sounds lovely, I'd replied, still floating in grief, grateful for their company. It's just, Vanessa had smiled. Syrupy sweet. Between the kids' tuition and everything else, we're a bit stretched. I'd understood. Or rather, I thought I did. A kitchen became a home renovation. Tuition assistants became luxury vehicles for both Lila and Noah when they turned 18. Family trips that I was invited to, but never asked if I could afford, turned into vacations I paid for, down to the very last glass of wine. That's how it happened. Slowly, like a leak in the foundation that eventually drowns the entire house. The ringing of the phone startled me out of my reverie. It was Vanessa. Evelyn, are you home? I've been trying your cell. I hadn't noticed. My phone still sat in the purse I'd used at the wedding. Yes, I'm here, I said, my voice cautious. Is something wrong? Oh no, everything's fine. We just wanted to thank you again for everything. Wasn't the wedding beautiful? Yes, I murmured. It was. Lila and Daniel are just over the moon. They couldn't have done it without you. My fingers tightened around the receiver. I remembered that $45,000 check written for the venue, catering, music, flowers, all of it. I was happy to help, I said, though I no longer knew if that was true. Well, Vanessa's voice shifted, silky and sweet. There's just one more thing. Daniel's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but unfortunately his father's business is going through a rough patch. Lila's devastated. I closed my eyes. Here it came. We were wondering, would you be able to help? They've got their hearts set on Bali. 2 weeks. We'd chip in, of course, but after everything we already spent, everything they spent, everything I paid for, I'll think about it, I said, my voice surprising even me. There was a pause. Oh well, they need to book soon to get the best rates. I understand. I said, I'll let you know tomorrow. And for the first time, I meant it. I wasn't saying yes. I wasn't saying no. I was saying, you'll wait, because I'm not a wallet in a dress anymore. After the call ended, I sat for a long while in the quiet of the house. The shadows had shifted across the carpet. Afternoon light bled through the lace curtains like honey, but I felt none of its warmth. I looked around at the walls, the bookshelves, the quiet places where Thomas used to sit. His armchair, the spot near the window where he'd polish his reading glasses absent-mindedly. This house held so much of him, of us. Now it was becoming little more than collateral in someone else's plan. I stood and began gathering the financial papers I'd scattered across the floor. I didn't want anyone, especially family, to see what I had begun uncovering. Not yet. I was still trying to absorb it myself. I had just closed the closet door when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole I saw Noah. I opened the door and was greeted with a hug, before I could say a word. He was 21 now, tall like his grandfather, with Thomas's kind eyes. Grandma, are you okay? I've been texting you. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, smiling despite myself. Just tired after yesterday. Come in. He followed me into the kitchen, and I started the kettle for tea again, rituals that helped me stay grounded. Noah sat at the table, watching me with quiet concern. I wanted to apologize, he said, for yesterday. The name tag. The way everyone was acting. It wasn't right. My hand paused over the teacups. I looked at him, really looked. You noticed? Of course I did. A lot of people did. I should have said something. I should have said something. Right there at the reception. I reached over and patted his hand. It wasn't your burden to carry. But it is my responsibility to stand up for myself now. He nodded, his gaze steady. Mom and Dad, they've changed since Grandpa died. Or maybe they've always been like this, and I didn't realize. What do you mean? Noah hesitated, then lowered his voice. Last week I overheard them talking about your house. Dad was saying how it's too big for one person, that maybe it's time for you to downsize. He said they'd help you through the transition. Sell it, make good use of the value. I felt a jolt run through me, a flash of cold, sharp awareness. So that was it. My house, too. I poured the hot water over the tea bags, my movements slower, more careful now. I thought of Charles's envelope, the codicil, the warning Thomas had buried like a seed for me to uncover when I needed it most. They want the house, I said quietly. Noah didn't speak for a moment. They say they want what's best for you, but it always comes back to the same thing. Your money. He looked at me then, eyes full of something I hadn't seen from anyone in the family in a long time, concern without expectation. Are you sure you're okay? I sat down across from him and placed the teapot on the table. I folded my hands. I think, I said slowly, that I'm seeing things more clearly than I have in years. Noah leaned forward. What does that mean? It means, it's time for some changes around here. We sipped our tea in silence for a few minutes. I found myself studying his face, so familiar, yet still in formation. Could I trust that he was different from the rest? That he hadn't learned their ways only to use them later? I didn't have that answer yet, but for the first time since Thomas's funeral, I felt something other than grief or resentment. I felt clarity. 3 days after the wedding, Stephen and Vanessa invited everyone to a post-wedding brunch at Elmsworth Country Club. I debated attending. The thought of spending more time under their performative smiles made my skin itch. But curiosity won out. I needed to know if the name tag had been a lapse in judgment, or part of a larger pattern. I arrived in a cream pantsuit that Thomas had always said made me look elegant. Regal. The dining room was flooded with sunlight and chatter. Familiar faces filled the tables. Lila and Daniel, Noah, a scattering of family friends. Mom, over here. Stephen waved from the head table. Vanessa greeted me with an air kiss. Evelyn, you look lovely. There was a slight pause before the word, as if she had to chew on it first. We saved you a seat right here, Stephen added, patting a chair between two people I barely knew. Daniel's parents. I sat politely, noting how far I'd been placed from my grandchildren. The brunch itself moved along pleasantly enough. Quiche, mimosas, fruit tarts, conversations about the wedding, small talk about travel and weather. I listened, contributing little, watching. Then Vanessa clinked her glass with a If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment. I froze. She stood, her smile dazzling and fake. Stephen and I just want to thank everyone for coming today, and for helping make Lila and Daniel's wedding so special. There was a murmur of polite applause, and of course a very special thank you to Grandma Evelyn. She continued, gesturing toward me. Without her incredible generosity, none of this would have been possible. Heads turned toward me. I forced a smile though my stomach churned, and Vanessa added, her voice bright with triumph. We're thrilled to announce that Grandma will also be gifting Lila and Daniel their dream honeymoon to Bali. A bigger wave of applause this time. I sat perfectly still, my coffee cup halfway to my lip. I hadn't agreed to any such thing. Stephen leaned toward me with a tight smile, stage whispering, Mom, they're ready to book. You don't want to back out now, right? I slowly set my cup down and folded my napkin. This, I said clearly, is the first I'm hearing of. A silence settled over the table like dust. Lila looked confused, her cheeks coloring. Daniel stared at his plate. Vanessa laughed lightly. Well, we talked about it yesterday, remember? You said you'd think about it. Yes, I said I'd think about it. And I am. Stephen's smile slipped. He leaned in again, voice tight. Don't make a scene, Mom. We already told them it was covered. I turned to face the table fully. I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon to Bali. I said loud enough that every conversation in the room stopped. In fact, I believe Daniel's parents were initially planning to handle that. Daniel's father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, well, we've had some business setbacks recently. These things happen, I said gently, but I think it's inappropriate to make public announcements about someone else's money without their consent. Don't you? The room held its breath. Perhaps, I continued, Lila and Daniel might consider a more modest honeymoon, one within their means. Vanessa's face flushed a deep red. Our means, she hissed, low and sharp. What about your means? That tone, that assumption, that unspoken belief that what was mine had somehow become theirs by default. My financial situation, I said, is not open for public discussion, and neither are my spending choices. Stephen's hand landed on my arm harder than necessary. Mom, stop. You're embarrassing us. I calmly pulled my arm away. No, Stephen, you've embarrassed yourselves. I rose slowly, smoothing the front of my jacket. Lila, Daniel, I wish you both every happiness. If I decide to contribute to your honeymoon, we'll speak privately, not like this. Noah stood up, wordlessly, and came to my side. I'll walk you out, Grandma. In the lobby, away from the stairs and mutters, I fumbled for my car keys. My hands shook. Are you okay to drive? Noah asked. I looked at him, and for the first time that day, I smiled. I'm more than okay, I said. I'm finally done pretending. That evening, as dusk settled outside and the house filled with the comforting smell of roasted chicken and rosemary, Noah sat across from me at the kitchen table. It was a modest dinner, nothing fancy, but it felt right. I served us both, grateful for the familiar rhythm of home-cooked meals and clinking silverware. It had been years since I'd felt like someone was here simply to spend time with me, not to soften me up for a favor. I still can't believe they said that, in front of everyone, Noah muttered as he reached for the breadbasket. Like it was nothing, like you were just a walking check. I shook my head slowly. You know, it didn't start that way. He looked up, puzzled. Your father and Vanessa, they weren't always like this, I said. When Thomas passed, they came around more often, invited me to dinner, checked in on me. I thought they were grieving too. I thought they just missed him and wanted to stay close. But that changed? Noah asked. Almost immediately, I replied, setting my fork down. That dinner I told you about, when they asked for help with the kitchen renovation, that was the first crack in the mask. I didn't see it then, but it was never about checking on me. It was about money. Noah's brow furrowed. I'm sorry, Grandma. I hate that you've been treated like this. I smiled faintly, grateful for his sincerity. I let it happen. That's the truth. I wanted to believe they cared. I mistook convenience for affection. Noah pushed his plate aside. They talk about you like you're a resource, not a person, and now they want to move you out of your home? I nodded. Dad was telling Vanessa he could help you transition. As if this place, this life you've built, is something you should be grateful to leave behind. I glanced around the kitchen, the floral curtains I'd sewn myself decades ago, the scratched wooden counter where Thomas used to chop vegetables, the dent in the cabinet door from when Noah, as a toddler, banged it open too hard while trying to sneak cookies. This wasn't just a house. It was a life. Noah, I said carefully, there's something I need to tell you. Something only Thomas and his attorney knew. I took a deep breath, feeling the moment settle around us like a hush in a church. Before Thomas passed, he added a codicil to his will, a hidden clause. He never told me about it, because he didn't want me to feel burdened, but Charles gave it to me at the wedding. Noah leaned in. What kind of clause? It says that if any of his descendants publicly humiliate me, they forfeit their inheritance. Noah blinked. Wait, I know, I said. It sounds harsh, but he was worried about how they might treat me when he was gone. Noah sat back in his chair, stunned. So all of this, Dad, Vanessa, the name tag, the brunch, they could lose everything. They already have, I said gently. They just don't know it yet. Noah ran a hand through his hair. Wow, I haven't decided what to do yet, I added, but I needed someone to know, someone I trust. He met my gaze, his voice soft. You can trust me. Before I could reply, the doorbell rang. I stood. Through the window I saw Stephen's car in the driveway. Noah rose with me. You don't have to answer that. No, I said. I think it's time we had the conversation we've been avoiding. I opened the door. Stephen stepped inside, face red, movements sharp with frustration. What the hell was that performance at brunch? He barked, brushing past me. You humiliated us. Then he spotted Noah. What are you doing here? Having dinner with Grandma, Noah replied calmly. Something you might try sometime without asking for money. Stephen glared at him. This is between your mother and me. No, I said firmly. It's not. If we're going to have this discussion, Noah stays. We moved into the living room. Stephen paced, like a man wound too tight. I've had enough of this attitude. First you embarrass us at brunch. Now you've been feeding Noah lies. No one's feeding me anything, Noah said. I've seen it with my own eyes. The way you treat her. Stephen waved him off. You're too young to understand. I understand enough to know manipulation when I see it. Stephen turned to me, softening his voice to the coaxing tone he always used when he wanted something. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You've always relied on Dad or me for help with big decisions. We're just trying to help. I'm 65, I said calmly. Not helpless. Not confused. Just finally done being used. His expression darkened. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked. What do you call years of demand? Vacations I funded, renovations I didn't agree to, cars, tuition, extravagant weddings, and now this house. He blanched. You heard about that. I nodded. Noah told me. And before you say I'm being unreasonable, let me be clear. This house is not for sale. My finances are not your business. And from now on, I decide what happens with what Thomas left behind. You're cutting us off? He snapped. I'm reclaiming my life, I said. He stared at me, eyes narrowed. Is this because of that stupid name tag? That was Vanessa's idea. A joke. You're going to ruin everything over one joke? It wasn't a joke, I said. It was a mirror. And I finally saw the truth. He turned to Noah. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Turning her against us. Noah didn't flinch. She's not against anyone. She's just finally standing up for herself. Stephen stormed toward the door. This isn't over. You can't just throw us away. I didn't move. I'm not throwing anyone away. I'm letting go of people who've already let go of me. The door slammed behind him, shaking the frame. In the silence that followed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Noah touched my arm. I'm proud of you. Tears welled in my eyes, but they didn't fall. You're standing up now, I whispered, hugging him tightly. That's what mattered. That night after he left, I sat alone in the quiet of my home. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. I looked again at the old family portrait, but it didn't sting the way it had before. I wasn't mourning what was lost anymore. I was beginning to build something new. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows as I stirred cream into my coffee. My hands felt steady, my breath unhurried. It was the first time in a long while I didn't feel like I was preparing for battle before breakfast. I picked up the phone and called Charles Mort. Evelyn, he said warmly. I've been hoping to hear from you. Yes, well, it's time, I replied. I need to understand exactly what Thomas left, not just the codicil, but the full scope of the estate. There was a brief pause on the other end. Perhaps we should discuss this in person. Could you come by this afternoon? 3 o'clock? Perfect. 3 hours later, I stepped into Charles's paneled office downtown. It hadn't changed much in the past few years. Same dark leather chairs. Same grandfather clock ticking softly in the corner. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore, nodding blankly through probate discussions. I was here with purpose. Charles reviewed the files carefully, laying out the documents on his polished oak desk. Thomas built little businesses over his lifetime, he began. He sold them at just the right times. His investments were conservative, but wise. They held up well, even during downturns. I always knew we were comfortable, I murmured, but I never asked for details. That was Thomas's domain. He nodded. He was private about money. Yes. But thorough. Very thorough. As Charles walked me through the numbers, I sat stunned. The figures were higher than I'd imagined. Much higher. Thomas didn't just secure your future, Charles said gently. He safeguarded your dignity. I exhaled slowly. He didn't want me to become one of those women with handbags that cost more than a month's mortgage. Charles smiled. He used to say, "She married me when I was all ambition and a rusted Chevy." I'll never forget that. My throat tightened. "In the codicil?" I asked. He pulled out a separate file. "It's strong, legally airtight. It clearly states that any descendant who publicly humiliates or attempts to exploit you loses their inheritance. Attempts to control your finances or force you out of your home, those also qualify." I thought of the name tag, the brunch, the long list of small humiliations that were in fact anything but. "What if I want to make some changes to my own will?" I asked, suddenly aware that my story wasn't over. It was just beginning. "What if I want to redirect things?" Charles leaned forward. "What did you have in mind?" By the time I left his office, I had a plan. No confrontations, no grand pronouncements, no scathing family meetings, just quiet changes. Small, deliberate steps to reclaim my life. I started by calling my old friend Eleanor, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. She answered on the third ring, her voice familiar and warm. "Evelyn Langley. I was just thinking about you." We arranged to meet for lunch the next day. It felt good, natural to reconnect. Next, I stopped by the local community center and picked up a brochure for adult education classes. Tucked among computer courses and yoga workshops was something that made my heart skip: oil painting for beginners. Every Thursday afternoon, Thomas had always encouraged me to paint. "You have an artist's eye," he'd said once, watching me arrange flowers on our sunroom table. Maybe it was time to try. That evening, I opened my laptop and began researching small business grants. Noah had once mentioned wanting to open a bookstore but had pushed it aside as a pipe dream. Now I wondered, what if I helped him build it, not as a handout, but as an investment? An investment in the part of my family that still understood respect. Just as I began making notes, my phone buzzed. The screen flashed, "Vanessa." I stared at it, then let it go to voicemail. The old me would have answered immediately, bracing for some new emergency. Not anymore. Later, I listened to the message. It was everything I expected. "Evelyn, hi, it's Vanessa. Stephen told me about your little disagreement. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've always had your best interests at heart. Lila mentioned you were reconsidering the honeymoon gift, and they really need to book soon to get the best rate. So if you could just delete." I didn't return the call. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a modest wedding gift for Lila and Daniel. Enough for a romantic trip in New England. Not Bali, but beautiful just the same. I enclosed it in a card with a handwritten note, wishing you both love, laughter, and shared dreams. May your marriage be rich in the things that matter most. Love always, Grandma. No drama, no explanations, just boundaries. I could feel Thomas's approval in the silence of the room, as if his presence rested on my shoulder, nodding. 6 months pass. In that time, I began to bloom again. Not loudly, but with intention. The painting class brought color back into my life. I made friends, took walks, relearned the rhythm of solitude and how to enjoy it without feeling alone. Noah visited often. We drank tea, talked about books and lunch. His bookstore plan took shape in quiet conversations and scribbled diagrams on my kitchen table. Eventually, I gave him the seed funding he needed to bring it to life. The others, Stephen and Vanessa, oscillated between cold distance and sudden bursts of artificial warmth. When silence didn't loosen my purse strings, they'd appear unannounced with pasted smiles and hollow gestures. Each visit inevitably veered toward money, home renovations, Lila's plans to buy a house, their own retirement concerns. I politely declined each time. "I'm not discussing my finances," I would say, always with a calm, practiced smile. Vanessa's text turned barbed. Stephen's tone grew sharp. But I had found something they no longer recognized in me: strength, clarity. My 66th birthday arrived on a crisp October morning. Noah had insisted on organizing a small family dinner at my house. "It's time they remember whose home this is," he'd said, his voice laced with something fierce. Something Thomas liked. The morning passed in soft rituals, deadheading the roses in the front garden, selecting a bold red dress I'd never have dared wear before. I even baked the cake myself. By mid-afternoon the house was spotless. My paintings, framed and proudly hung, brought life back to the once muted walls. I felt like I was opening the door not just to family but to a declaration. I am still here. Noah arrived early to help with platters and place settings. I watched him arrange a cheese board with precision. "You ready for this?" he asked. I looked around at the table, at the glowing kitchen, the candles flickering beside handwritten place cards. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. The doorbell rang promptly at 5. I opened it to find Stephen and Vanessa standing on the porch. He held a bouquet of supermarket flowers. Her eyes swept over me, then around the changed entryway. "Happy birthday, Mom," Stephen said stiffly. "You look different," Vanessa added, her tone caught between admiration and confusion. "Thank you," I said. "Come in." Lila and Daniel arrived next, followed by Charles Morton and two dear friends of Thomas's from his old firm. Warm greetings echoed through the living room as I moved gracefully among them, no longer the ghost of a grieving widow. I caught Stephen watching everything: me, the house, the paintings, the guests. His eyes flicked to the new art on the wall. "Did you redecorate?" Vanessa asked. "Just a few updates," I replied. "I've been painting." "Painting?" Stephen echoed. "As in, selling art?" "No," Noah said proudly. "As in making it. Grandma's already sold 2 pieces at the local art fair." Vanessa blinked. "Why would you sell anything?" I smiled gently. "Because it brings me joy, Vanessa." The room went still, momentarily unsure how to respond. Daniel quickly changed the subject, asking Noah about the bookstore. Noah beamed, explaining his plans while I quietly watched the space I'd made, this home, this new version of life, begin to hold its own. I was no longer sitting at the edge of my own story. I was fully inside it. After dinner, as the last of the wine was poured and candlelight danced against the polished wood of the dining table, I moved to the kitchen to cut the cake. It was a lemon almond recipe I'd been perfecting, one Thomas used to request on special occasions. As I lifted the knife preparing to slice into it, Vanessa appeared beside me. Her tone was low and urgent. "Evelyn, what's going on with you?" I paused. "Excuse me? First, you refused to help with the honeymoon," she said, her voice a whisper cloaked in accusation. "Then you vanish for months, and now we find out you're throwing money at Noah's fantasy." I raised an eyebrow. "Fantasy?" she scoffed. "A bookstore? In this economy? You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment." "It's not sentiment," I said evenly. "It's vision, and he has a solid business plan." "You're being naive," she snapped. "Bookstores don't make money. He's using you." "No, Vanessa," I said, turning to meet her gaze directly. "He respects me. There's a difference." She blinked. Stephen stepped into the kitchen, perhaps sensing the growing heat. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, forcing a jovial tone. "Wonderful," I replied, wiping the knife on a linen cloth. "We're just about to serve dessert, actually," Stephen said, raising his voice just slightly. "Before we move on, there's something Vanessa and I would like to bring up with everyone." My hand froze mid-slice. This wasn't in the plan. As the guests carried their coffee into the living room, Stephen positioned himself beside the fireplace. The others settled onto armchairs and the couch, polite curiosity in their expressions. "I'd like to speak candidly," he began, "about something that's become a growing concern for Vanessa and me." I stood near the dining room entrance, cake knife still in hand, watching the performance unfold. "We've noticed some changes in my mother lately," Stephen said. "Uncharacteristic decisions, isolating behavior, impulsive financial choices." Vanessa nodded solemnly beside him. "And while we respect her independence," Stephen continued, "we also feel a responsibility to ensure she's protected." The air in the room thick. "We believe it may be time to explore a power of attorney arrangement," he concluded, "just so someone can help manage her finances more responsibly." A pause followed. Then Charles Morton cleared his throat with slow precision. "That's a very serious recommendation, Stephen," he said. "Do you have evidence of diminished capacity?" "She's funding a bookstore," Stephen blurted. "And she refuses to even consider downsizing from this house. She's becoming increasingly unstable." I had heard enough. I stepped forward and set the cake knife down carefully on the coffee table. I am not unstable, I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. I am not confused. I am not in decline. I am simply done being managed. Stephen turned red. Mom, be reasonable. I've been reasonable, I interrupted. For 3 years I've paid for everything you've asked, without question, because I believed you still saw me as your mother, not a bank account with a pulse. Vanessa stiffened. We've always looked out for you. No, I said. You've looked through me, past me, at what I could provide. There was a silence then, taut and brittle. So what, Stephen spat? You're cutting us off, humiliating us in front of everyone. I looked around the room. Lila sat silently, her hands clasped in her lap. Daniel had one arm around her shoulders. Noah stood by the bookshelf, jaw tense. Charles's expression was unreadable, but he held my gaze with a faint, almost imperceptible nod. No, Stephen, I said. You've humiliated yourselves. Stephen stepped forward, voice rising. You selfish old woman. After everything we've done for you. It was at that moment Charles stood. That's quite enough, he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. Actually, this is the exact situation your father anticipated. Stephen stopped cold. What? Charles reached into his jacket and pulled out a familiar envelope. Thomas Langley added a codicil to his will, he said. Shortly before his death, Vanessa's eyes widened. What kind of codicil, may I, Evelyn? Charles asked, looking to me. I nodded. It states, he continued, that any descendant who publicly humiliates or disrespects Evelyn Langley forfeits their inheritance. That includes treating her as a financial asset, attempting to control her home, or pressuring her against her wishes. A pin could have dropped. That's absurd, Stephen muttered. Dad would never. He did, Charles said, and I have been documenting relevant incidents. As executor, the brunch, the name tag, this evening's proposal to declare your mother legally unfit. Vanessa paled. Charles turned to me. Evelyn, I need to ask, would you like to enforce the codicil? I looked from Stephen to Vanessa. Their faces had gone from arrogant to alarmed, the transformation oddly satisfying. Then I turned to Noah, who looked steady and calm, to Lila, who sat with a kind of quiet shock, and to Charles, who was waiting patiently for my answer. Yes, I said. Stephen collapsed into the nearest chair, stunned. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I said. Vanessa's voice came out thin and brittle. But our inheritance is forfeit, Charles confirmed. Lila blinked. Wait, mine too. You were present at several key incidents, Charles said gently. You didn't instigate them, but you also didn't speak up. Lila's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma, I should have said something. I just didn't know how. I reached over and took her hand. It's all right. The question is what you'll do with that awareness now. Daniel pulled her closer, holding her hand tightly. So what happens? Vanessa asked, barely above a whisper. Half of the forfeited inheritance passes directly to Evelyn, Charles explained. The other half is reallocated to any descendant who has shown her respect and care. All eyes turned to Noah. He looked genuinely stunned. I didn't know about any of this, he said quickly. Oh, I know, I said softly. But your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become. Stephen stood suddenly, his voice shaking. This is a setup. She planned this. She let us keep asking so she could punish us later. I never promised you anything, I said. You assumed, you demanded. But you never asked what I needed. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Stephen, please. He turned toward the door, shaking with rage. This isn't over. It is, I said quietly, because I'm finally choosing peace. The gathering unraveled shortly after that. Lila and Daniel left first, offering quiet apologies and promises to visit soon. I believed them, at least Lila. There was sincerity in her voice that hadn't been there before, and a kind of quiet reckoning in her eyes. Stephen and Vanessa didn't speak another word. They marched out of my home in brittle silence, as though the weight of their embarrassment couldn't bear witness. Charles and the others made polite exits, leaving only Noah and me in the kitchen. clearing the untouched dessert plate. Noah placed 2 coffee mugs in the sink, then turned to me with that steady look of his, the one that reminded me so deeply of Thomas that it almost made me ache. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I wiped down the counter, then paused. "I'm better than all right," I said slowly. "I feel free." Noah smiled, warm and real. "You should." We stood in silence for a moment, listening to the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. "I meant what I said, Grandma," he added. "You're doing something brave. Not just for you, for everyone." I nodded, but a heaviness lingered. Not sadness, not guilt. Just the weight of change, of truth. Later that night, after Noah left, I sat alone in the living room and looked at the old family portrait on the mantel. Once I couldn't bear to look at it without feeling the sting of disappointment, but now I saw it differently. It was a picture of who we were once, not who we had to remain, and I was no longer trying to hold on to something broken. I was ready to build something new. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. I wrote out a list of things I wanted, not for anyone else, just for me. At the top, reclaim joy. I started small. Every Thursday, I attended painting class at the community center. The instructor, a silver-haired woman named Linda, wore long scarves and smelled faintly of citrus. She was both nurturing and blunt in a way that reminded me of women I'd once admired but never dared become. "Loosen up, Evelyn," she'd say with a laugh. "The brush doesn't bite." And so I did. Slowly, week by week, my lines softened. My palette brightened. I painted landscapes, birds, quiet doorways, things I'd never noticed I loved until I started painting them. By spring, I'd entered 2 pieces in the community art fair. To my surprise, both sold. The buyers were strangers. That made it even more thrilling. Someone wanted my art without knowing anything about me. It wasn't about money. It was about being seen. Noah and I grew closer with every week. The bookstore, the reading room, was taking shape, first as a business plan, then as signed papers, and eventually as a charming, light-filled space in an old Victorian building downtown. "I still can't believe it's happening," he told me one morning as we toured the renovation. "I thought I'd be shelving this dream until I was 40. "You're just starting earlier than most," I said, beaming. He smiled, but then added more softly, "I wouldn't have made it this far without you." I squeezed his shoulder. "You would have." I just gave the push. With part of his inheritance, Noah added a writer-in-residence apartment upstairs, and a children's section filled with colorful cushions, shelves shaped like trees, and soft, calming lighting. He named the upstairs reading room after Tom. By summer, we opened the doors with an event that drew more people than we expected. I wore a bright blue dress and a soft silk scarf, my silver hair styled back. I smiled so much that day, my cheeks hurt. The following week, Lila came in, pushing a stroller. Inside was a baby girl, swaddled in pink and soft as a cloud. "This is Roberta," she said shyly, lifting the edge of the blanket. "We call her Birdie." I felt tears rise. "After?" Lila nodded. "After Grandpa." She looked at me, eyes glassy but clear. "I'm sorry, Grandma, for everything I didn't say, for how I didn't protect you." "You're saying it now," I replied. "That matters more." We sat at a table near the front window. Sunlight poured in, dappled by the leaves of the old tree outside. "Mom and Dad are in Florida now," she said, adjusting Birdie's blanket. "Dad's working with one of his old business partners. They're not doing well." I nodded. "I've heard. They still think it's unfair. What happened?" "I'm sure they do," I said. Lila glanced at me. "But I don't. Not anymore." That afternoon, we sat there a long time. She told me about Birdie's first smile, Daniel's new job, the slow ways she'd started building a different kind of life, one that didn't center around performance or approval. As I walked her to the door, she paused. "Do you think it's too late for me to rebuild things with you?" I touched her arm. "It's never too late to start being honest." Weeks turned to months. The bookstore thrived. We added literacy tutoring for adults and writing workshops for teens. I began hosting Story Hour for children every Saturday morning. painting whimsical bookmarks in my free time to sell near the register. I traveled more, first small trips, then a senior tour through Italy. In Florence, I met a man named Henry, a retired architect from Boston, kind-eyed and witty. He called me every Sunday now. He made me laugh again. He made me feel possible. And through it all, Thomas remained with me, not in the haunting way he had at first, but as a quiet presence, a remembered smile in the back of my mind, the warmth behind every brave choice I made. One morning, I stood in the upstairs reading room at the bookstore. Light streamed in through tall windows, my latest painting, an abstract sky in gold and lavender, hung on the far wall. Bertie toddled across the rug, giggling. Lila sat nearby, reading a novel. Noah was downstairs laughing with a customer. Emma, his girlfriend, was baking fresh scones in the cafe kitchen. And me? I stood there and thought, this is what Thomas would have wanted. Not just the legacy, not just the money, but this life. A life lived fully, on my terms. Autumn rolled in with gold-tipped trees and the scent of wood smoke on the wind. At the reading room, the windows were framed with little pumpkins and paper leaves that the neighborhood children had decorated during story hour. Business was steady. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and fresh pastries, and I found myself arriving early just to sit and soak it all in. One quiet Tuesday morning, I was working on a new bookmark design, tiny foxes dancing through an autumn forest, when the doorbell chimed. Lila stepped inside, Bertie bundled in a fleece jacket, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "Grandma," Lila smiled, making her way to my corner table. "Didn't expect to find you here today." "I had an idea I needed to sketch before it slipped away," I said, holding up the half-painted card. "What do you think?" Bertie clapped her mittened hands. "Fox," she squealed. "That's the highest praise I could ask for," I said, laughing. We sat for a while drinking spiced tea and sharing a cranberry scone. Lila told me about her plans to go back to school part-time, about Daniel's new project at work. She didn't mention her parents, and I didn't ask. Some silences are best left undisturbed. Emma joined us briefly, cooing over Bertie, then returned to the counter. Moments later, Noah appeared from the back office with a stack of new arrivals in his arms. "Perfect timing," he said, dropping the books gently onto the display table. "I wanted to run something by you." He slid into the seat beside us, brushing croissant crumbs off his flannel shirt. He was glowing with purpose, his eyes bright with the quiet fire of someone finally living on his own terms. "I've been thinking about expanding our community programs, adding a memoir writing class for seniors, and maybe a Saturday afternoon poetry series." "That's wonderful," I said. "People need space to share their stories. It would mean putting more of our profits into programming," he added cautiously. "But I think it's worth." Lila nodded. "Absolutely." I looked between the two of them, my grandson who had risen from the ashes of dysfunction with grace and clarity, and my granddaughter who had broken free from inherited patterns and was slowly, deliberately building something new. "I think it's not only worth it," I said. "I think it's exactly what this place was meant to be." And I did. The bookstore had become more than a family business. It was a sanctuary, a home for stories, both and lit. Every shelf, every chair, every cup of tea served was a quiet act of reclamation, a way of saying, we are not what they tried to make us. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the quiet space alone, flipping off lights one by one. Upstairs, the little apartment was ready for the next writer in residence, a young woman from Vermont who'd submitted a beautiful, aching essay about grief and migration. In the corner of the living room hung one of my earliest paintings, a winding path through a foggy forest. I'd titled it Return, though I hadn't fully understood why at the time. Now I did. It wasn't just about returning to art, or to the person I used to be before I became the old lady who pays for everything. It was about returning to myself. That Sunday, the phone rang promptly at 10. I smiled before I even picked it up. "Evelyn Langley," I answered, teasing. The full name treatment," Henry said on the other end, his Boston lilt making the syllables sound crisper than mine. "Should I be worried?" Depends. Have you made those risottos for your Wednesday cooking class yet? Working on it. But my squash is too smug today. I laughed. Squash can be arrogant. You have to keep them humble. Henry and I spoke every Sunday, rain or shine. We weren't rushing anything. We'd met in Rome on a dusty cobblestone street where I dropped a travel guide, and he'd picked it up with the line, "If it's in Italian, I'll need a translator, and maybe lunch." We'd shared gelato and a long walk that day. Since then, we'd stayed in touch. Slow, warm, steady. "You're coming for Thanksgiving, right?" I asked him now. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Unless my smug squash stages a rebellion." After we hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet. My home felt different now. Not because of any renovations, but because it was no longer a battleground. The energy had shifted. Peace had moved in. Stephen and Vanessa, true to form, made one last attempt to contest the codicil. It was promptly dismissed. They moved to Florida not long after, taking their bitterness with them. The only contact we now had were hollow Christmas cards with generic signatures. I no longer felt anger, just distance. Sometimes distance is the most merciful boundary we can set. The following week, during story hour, I sat on a round rug surrounded by children. My voice rose and fell with the tale of a girl who built a ladder to the stars. Birdie sat in my lap, holding a plush fox. Her eyes were wide, her breath still. Afterward, a mother came up to me. "Are you the owner?" "One of them," I said. "But the real bosses are under 4 feet tall." She laughed. "This place. It's special." I smiled. "It is." As the crowd thinned and the staff began resetting the chairs, Noah came over with 2 cups of tea. He handed me one, then looked around the room as though seeing it for the first time. "I never imagined all of this," he said softly. "That's the thing about dreams," I replied. "They grow when we do." He looked at me. "Grandma?" "Yeah. Do you think Grandpa would be proud of us?" I took a long sip, then reached out and held his hand. "I know he is." And in that moment, I felt it, not memory, not grief, but presence. Not behind me, but with me. Always. In a world where love can be quietly overshadowed by entitlement, the story of Evelyn Langley reminds us of a powerful truth. Self-worth doesn't diminish with age. It deepens through heartbreak, betrayal, and the weight of generational expectations. Evelyn's journey is a testimony to rediscovering dignity, reclaiming power, and choosing peace over performance. She didn't rage. She didn't retaliate. Instead, she set boundaries with grace, transforming pain into purpose and silence into strength. Her courage shows that it's never too late to rewrite your story, reconnect with what truly matters, and create a legacy grounded in respect, not obligation. Whether you're a mother, grandmother, or simply someone learning to speak up for yourself, this story is a mirror, and maybe even a map. If Evelyn's transformation moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on your own relationships, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to support more heartfelt storytelling like this. Every like helps this story reach more people who may need its message of resilience and quiet rebellion. If you'd like to see more narratives that spotlight emotional healing, generational shifts, and the quiet strength of women reclaiming their voices, hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. And now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country, city, or region in the comments. I'd love to see how far Evelyn's story has traveled and how it resonates around the world.